With so many Metroidvanias releasing this month, it's easy for something like Chasm to fall to the wayside. It doesn't feature the roguelike elements that makes Dead Cells so addictive, and its art style just isn't as immediately striking as something like Hollow Knight. So in a release period with so many great games to scratch the exploration-based action itch, is Chasm worth your time? Chasm puts you in control of a rookie knight who is charged with investigating the mysterious closure of one of the kingdom's most important mines. Upon arriving in the mining town, you find that all but one of the townsfolk have gone missing, presumably abducted by the subterranean evils found in the depths of the mine itself. It's up to you to return the town of Carthus to its former glory by braving the dangers found below and saving the townsfolk. As far as plots go, Chasm is pretty by the numbers, but at the very least you have some decent motivation to be exploring the eponymous chasm. Though games like Hollow Knight may have a rich world and lore, I often find that I don't know why my character is doing what they're doing, so Chasm's simplicity and straightforward character goal is appreciated. On top of that, there's a decent amount of effort put into building the world via collectible journal entries, and they honestly paint an interesting picture of the history of the game world, complete with dark gods and mad kings. Chasm's engaging world is brought to life using detailed pixel art, and while it may not stand out as much as some of its contemporaries, the game still looks great. Unique and detailed enemy designs and tile sets that are distinct between each area keep the game looking fresh, though it would have been nice to see a little more variety when it comes to your character. Even when equipping new gear, the sprite never changes, and I found this to be just a little bit disappointing. To go along with the various areas to explore, Chasm features a soundtrack that sounds like slight variations on the same musical idea. Apart from the exceptionally soothing town theme, each track feels dark and foreboding, while still featuring their own unique motifs. The garden track, for instance, has a more tribal feel, what with its more pronounced percussion, while the keep area has a much more intricate melody on top of the deep rumbling found amongst most of the other themes. The suitable sound design also applies to traversal and combat actions. Weapon strikes sound sharp with a decent variety depending on the weapon currently equipped, and actions like sliding down walls or flipping through the air also have satisfying sound effects attached to them. Having solid sound design with regards to the moment-to-moment gameplay is important, especially when your game is really relying on that core gameplay to be satisfying. Where its contemporaries choose to incorporate high difficulty levels and roguelike elements into their base gameplay, Chasm instead opts for a more traditional approach to the Metroidvania formula. The name of the game is exploration and combat, and while this means that Chasm doesn't really innovate a whole lot, the sheer amount of polish applied to the core mechanics makes me feel like it doesn't really need to innovate all that much. Honestly, it's just fun to run around the map whacking enemies and platforming, and it only gets more fun as you progress thanks to gradual stat increases from killing monsters, as well as the constant flow of new abilities to play around with. The challenge throughout the game is manageable, but returning to earlier stages with late game gear and stats makes you feel super powerful. It's really satisfying. So at this stage, we all know how Metroidvanias work, right? You work your way around a maze-like map, exploring everything you possibly can while accumulating skills that allow you to explore what would have previously been dead ends. I suppose the main thing Chasm does differently is that it procedurally generates the map when you begin the game. Unlike many procedurally generated worlds, Chasm still feels well put together, due to the fact that the rooms themselves have been individually designed, and I believe the actual layout is the only randomized element. Regardless of how the map is put together, the way Chasm provides shortcuts between the far reaches of each zone, and also uses these shortcuts to allow warping between entirely different areas, is appreciated. Due to the sheer size of the zone maps, trekking from one end to the other would be a huge waste of time, even more so if you had to use specific physical entrances when swapping between areas. These warp and shortcut rooms also serve as a quick way to get you back to town, so you can check up on the villages you've saved, and even shop for items. Accessing these new areas for the first time though often takes a special item or skill to bypass an obstacle, and in Chasm, these are called artifacts. These allow you to grab ledges, slide under narrow gaps, wall jump, or even double jump, and while none of these are original in terms of Metroidvania mechanics, they're all gratifying to use. You're constantly seeing new paths that you'll need to return to later to explore, and finally claiming one of these abilities and then returning to an earlier section of the game to use it is always a fulfilling experience. Using these artifacts is a big part of what makes Chasm's platforming so enjoyable. You start off with a basic jump, but before long you find yourself incredibly mobile. One of my few complaints with the game is that the base jump could probably stand to be a bit more responsive. I found there to be a bit of an input delay when jumping, so when it came to doing multiple jumps in quick succession, the character would often stumble off a ledge despite me pressing the button to jump. This issue is mitigated a little bit by certain abilities, but the main ones that affect it are found near the tail end of the game. I also found that the game's dodge mechanics suffered from a similar level of latency. Using it in tandem with an attack was often unreliable, and there's a bit too much of a delay after dodging to make it particularly useful against most enemies. Despite this, I generally found the combat to be pretty enjoyable. It's a little bit on the simple side as you don't unlock any new combat skills beyond Castlevania style magic items, but the variety of weapons on offer do allow you to mix up your playstyle at any given time. While certain weapons may be stronger in terms of their stats, a lot of the game's approach to combat relies on the moveset that you find yourself most comfortable with. Big, heavy weapons have a good vertical range, but are incredibly slow, while horizontal slashing swords are much quicker, albeit weaker and with less range. Personally, I found myself clinging to the game's various whip offerings, not just because I love Castlevania, but because they have a great range and a deliberate timing on their use. Knowing the ins and outs of your weapon and magic of choice is vital throughout Chasm, but never more so than in the boss fights. These encounters are fast-paced, and the various bosses all deal significant damage, but for the most part, they're pretty manageable. They tend to have easily recognizable patterns, and as long as you can survive a cycle or two of their attacks, you'll have seen enough to be able to effectively dodge and counterattack as necessary. That's not to say that they aren't intimidating though. They're typically much faster, and designed to look way more scary than most standard enemies, so they provide a decent yet reasonable spike in challenge every so often. Unless of course you find a weapon and magic combination that just absolutely wrecks the boss in moments. That's unfortunately very possible and super disappointing when it does happen. One of the only things that tripped me up while I played were Chasm's puzzles. While it does have a handful of interesting and engaging puzzles, there are a couple that simply require you to bring X object to Y door to unlock it. The problem that I found is that you'll generally come across these doors hours and hours before you'll find the relevant key, and finding your way back to them once you have the object you need can be pretty tedious. It's not like finding unexplored paths because these are generally noted on the map with incomplete corridors. Even so, these minor annoyances only crop up once or twice, so it wasn't enough to diminish my enjoyment overall. Beyond the main goal of saving the townsfolk and uncovering the greater mystery of the depths, Chasm has a number of side quests to complete, as well as collectibles to find and a bestiary to fill out. While none of these are necessary to finish the game, you are often rewarded with gear for completing the side quests, and the collectible notes and bestiary just add a little more flavour to Chasm's already interesting world. When you also take the game's procedurally generated elements into account, Chasm not only has a decent amount of content to offer in a single playthrough, it also offers plenty in terms of keeping subsequent playthroughs interesting. With all that said, Chasm is good. It may not have a lot to set itself apart from other Metroidvanias, but the game nails the fundamentals of the subgenre so well that it's hard not to recommend it. Chasm may come off as a bit generic or unambitious, but it's still a whole lot of fun. I'd highly recommend this to lovers of the subgenre, as well as folks who are interested in Metroidvanias, but want to experience one in its most pure and simple form.